Hello, everyone. I'm Angela Rosa DiDonato.
And I'm Marian Leary.
And you're listening to Amplify Nursing, a Penn Nursing podcast supported by the Pinola Fund for Innovation in Nursing.
Amplify Nursing features nurses who are leading the way in science, policy, and innovation.
Our guests defy stereotypes, define practice, and disrupt convention.
We highlight the breadth and depth of nursing influence on society by amplifying nurses who are pushing boundaries and breaking down barriers to build a new paradigm.
I think very much they need to go into this understanding that this is an extension of their practice, and they need to know how to embrace it and take advantage of what it has to offer, but not be overly dependent on it for the things that indeed require their human expertise.
This season on Amplify Nursing, we're exploring the impact of AI in healthcare. In this episode, we talk with Dr. Suzanne Bakken, professor and vice dean for research at Columbia Nursing. She reflects on her 50-year nursing journey from critical care to leadership in biomedical informatics and the evolution of her focus on systems thinking and problem solving. The discussion highlights human-centered AI through 5 lenses from Anderson and Coiera: design, values, interaction, socio-technical systems, and implementation. Dr. Bakken emphasizes the needs for nurses to be involved in AI development and evaluation, with core competencies in ethics, model understanding, and critical assessment. She also addresses bias and equity, underscoring the importance of vigilance, community engagement, and transparency. The episode closes with resources for nurses interested in building knowledge around equitable AI.
Well, hello, Dr. Bakken. Thank you so much for being on the Penn Nursing Amplify Nursing podcast today. I'm really excited to talk with you.
Yeah, I'm really delighted to be with you and share some of my thoughts with your audience.
So before we delve into why I wanted to talk with you, which is all around AI and human-centered AI in healthcare, can you just talk about your background, where you're at now, and how you got into nursing?
Sure. Currently, I'm at Columbia University. I am a professor in both the School of Nursing and the Department of Biomedical Informatics, and I also serve as the Vice Dean for Research at Columbia Nursing. I have been a nurse since 1974. In terms of clinical career, I started off as a critical care nurse, and I subsequently became a critical care clinical nurse specialist and did those roles before I went back to get my PhD in 1985, finishing in 1989 at the University of California, San Francisco. I will say early on, when thinking about how nursing and informatics came together for me, often when someone comes out of a critical care nursing background into informatics, people think it's because of the technology, but it's not so much the technology. It really is the critical thinking that you need as a critical care nurse, and having so many things going on with the patient at the same time. And from a very early age, I was always very fond of what we called story problems in my day, and that was really decomposing a problem and coming up with a solution. And I think that's part of what was always interesting about informatics to me, because I think that's one of the most important parts of it, is being able to think about problems from different angles. And my baccalaureate education at Arizona State University was very unusual. And as I said, I graduated in 1974. And at that particular time, they had a competency-based curriculum with no tests, and it was very self-paced. You had different types of educational modules you could do, and doing everything meeting all the course requirements resulted in a B grade. So to do anything, to get an A in a course, you always had to do something extra. And so I was drawn to do both not only research projects, but also community-based projects, which has played out my in my career. But the one thing I want to mention about this particular educational program was we spent the first week of the curriculum learning about systems theory and von Bertalanffy. And so much of his work is played out in terms of like Donna Bedian's structure, process, outcomes. So it was very unusual and fit very well with my interest in kind of systems thinking. And when I was a critical care nurse, I would not only think about the care for an individual patient, but I was always thinking about the system and how to systematize it. What could we do to make something a standard of care? And so it was much of that kind of led me to my interest in informatics. But that really got reinforced when I was a critical care clinical nurse specialist. I got invited to be a domain expert for some computer-assisted instruction. And the plan had been the developers had the idea in the state of California to teach nurses how to interpret 12 lead EKGs. And I convinced them that it would be more appropriate to teach nurses how to manage arrhythmias. And that was a better fit with my skill set. I was very interested in working on this computer-assisted instruction. And so there were many nurses who got into informatics at that period of time in the early 80s that came in through that kind of educational route. The other part of that ended up playing out in my career is when I wanted to evaluate the effect of that computer-assisted instruction once we had it developed. I felt like I didn't know how to do it. Like my master's level skill had run out. I consulted one of my master's advisors, and she said, "Why would you bother?" And I felt very strongly that wasn't the answer, and that I thought it was important to evaluate it. So I basically worn out my master's degree. So I decided to get a doctorate at the University of California, San Francisco. And I went into it in 1985 with the idea that I would combine my interest in computers with my interest in critical care nursing. And I did this by using computer simulations and some other methods to study how experienced and inexperienced critical care nurses made clinical decisions. After that, in a few years of being a faculty member, I really wanted to move from describing how people were making clinical decisions to doing decision support. And that was what led me in 1991 to go to Stanford University to do a postdoctoral fellowship in medical informatics funded by the National Library of Medicine. And so that really set me on the path to applying a variety of different informatics theories, processes, methods to build knowledge in nursing. And then I was on the faculty at UCSF, and I was recruited to Columbia in 2000 as a full professor. And so I built our informatics program here within the School of Nursing with the help of great colleagues from the Department of Biomedical Informatics. So I guess that was a pretty long answer to your introductory question.
But it highlights the incredible 50-year journey that you've had in nursing. And I say this a lot for the role that I have. I could have never imagined what I'm doing today back when I was thinking about a degree in nursing. And I would imagine it's the same for you, right? Like 1974, were you thinking there's this thing called, informatics and now AI, and you'd be doing work in those areas?
Not so much, but I was thinking like much of the name medical informatics was just being coined by Francois Gramy in France in 1974, at the time that I was graduating with my bachelor's in nursing. But although we didn't have a name for it, the kind of thinking that I was doing from taking a problem I was experiencing in critical care nursing, for instance, making sure that we knew I was an adult post-op cardiovascular surgical nurse at Stanford University, but we took care of all the open heart children as well. So the great majority of time we were taking care of adults, but then we'd have 6-month-old babies and other children, and just thinking this is hard to be calculating the drugs on the fly and those kinds of things. So thinking about what were the ways we could create tools at that point in time, paper-based tools, are really some of the same kinds of human-centered processes that we think about doing as preliminary work in informatics around understanding the user's information needs, understanding the workflow processes, and all of those kinds of things. So they really are the pre-technology precursors of understanding the problem well, and then thinking not about the technology as the hammer looking for a nail, looking for something to do, but really thinking about how a variety of technologies could be used to solve an important healthcare problem.
So that's one of the things I wanted to talk with you about, was this human-centered approach to AI. So we had met at the Penn Nursing AI in Nursing Symposium earlier this year. I think it was in January. And you presented a slide entitled Human-Centered AI in Healthcare. And I was fascinated by it because the work I do at Penn Nursing is focused on the innovation methodology of human-centered design, equity-centered design, and design thinking, where we're allowing the end users to really highlight what their needs are, and then co-collaborating with them to create solutions that meet those needs, wants, and desires. And to see the term human-centered applied to AI, I found really fascinating. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about what human-centered AI is, what the word human-centered means in AI, and how we can make sure that the technologies that are driving healthcare now through AI are more human-centered.
Yes, and often when people talk about human-centered AI, they talk about having more human in the loop to make sure that it's not the AI alone. A model that I have been using to help think about human-centeredness in AI comes from Anderson and also Enrico Coiera, who's an Australian MD PhD who has influenced my thinking multiple times during the years. And so Anderson and Coiera present these 5 lenses for human-centered AI in healthcare. And one of them is the one that you talked about and I hinted at, is really thinking about human-centered AI as a design process that engages the prospective users in the creation of appropriate systems this co-design, co-evaluation. And yes, that's been very much an important process in many fields, human-computer interaction, as well as informatics. I really like this Anderson and Coiera 5 lenses because it talked about human-centered AI more broadly. One is thinking about it as a system characteristics that aligns with human and societal values. And so thinking about when AI systems operate in ways that support and engender trust, fairness, human control, etc. Also thinking about human-centered AI in terms of interaction. And so often people in the HCI community think very much about what are those interactions in terms of efficiency. One of the places, and this is really thinking about the relation between the people and the AI, and I think about 2 particular things in this way. One of the common things that we hear a lot about today is the AI explainable? And often what people think about in that regard is really being able to understand the what's going on behind the scenes. So often thinking about chat values and being able to show how much a particular variable contributed to some type of prediction. When I think about interaction, and I'm much more interested from the interaction side and more thinking about the output of the AI and is it comprehensible and actionable by whoever the recipient of the output is, whether we're talking about whether it's the clinician or in some instance the patient is directly receiving about it. The other thing I think about in this particular regard is thinking about AI use in the clinical setting. And one of the things I worry about is whether or not the clinicians will consider the AI as the gold standard and not think about the triad in a particular encounter that would take into account the patient's lived experience and the clinician's expertise. And that kind of feeds into another one of the lenses that come from Anderson and Coiera, and that is thinking about human-centered AI as socio-technical systems and really realizing that healthcare work is achieved by a complex network that includes the people, the practices, and the technologies. And the last lens of the human-centered AI from this particular model is thinking about it in implementation and making sure that the AI gets moved beyond just the design and the validation of the model and really gets evaluated in the wild, in the actual healthcare setting, because we know there can be issues over time. We know there's a lot of algorithms already out in practice. We know there can be algorithmic drift as underlying data changes, as the context changes. So a lot more emphasis gets put on how the model is developed and its initial validation, and keeping it human-centered really means making sure we understand how it behaves in the wild and making sure that we have appropriate algorithmic vigilance strategies in place to keep that human-centered part so that the AI remains safe for patients and clinicians.
So it brings up a question then, whose responsibility is it to make sure AI is human-centered? Is that something nurses should be asking when they're presented with all these new technologies that have AI integrated into them?
Yeah, I mean, if you say like it's everyone's responsibility, then we feel it ends up being no one's really accountable for it. I think it's important that nurses are in the AI development life cycle of systems that they're expected to be interacting with in their care so they can make those assessments. But I think to be able to do that, when we think about how nurses need to be prepared in this era of ubiquitous AI, is yes, we need people who need to be expert methodologists to be involved in developing AI and designing rigorous evaluations of it. But we also need to make sure that every nurse has a basic set of competencies that would assist them to understand how to integrate AI into their practice, to evaluate it in the context of the practice, to have a good sense of where it's relevant, where it's safe and unsafe, and those kinds of things. So I think there is shared responsibility, certainly from the developers to the implementers, but I don't think that end user gets off the hook at all. I think they still need to be able to critically assess the relevance for the particular situation, not just accept it as the gold standard or the truth for that particular encounter.
I talk with a lot of nurses who are very hesitant about new technologies and especially AI. So I'm wondering, for the nurses listening to this episode, you mentioned they should also, have some accountability and should have some basic set of competencies. Can you talk a little bit about what you think the top few competencies might be and how they could acquire those to feel more comfortable and to know how to ask those questions about the AI technologies that they're using?
Yeah, and I think it has to be built into the nursing education from the baccalaureate level onward, and it's going to depend on role what people need to know. But I think everyone needs to have a foundation in kind of the ethics of AI and appropriate use in both education and in practice. I think they need to know enough about how these things work to have at least to not be broadly accepting and to understand, for instance, in this era of lots of generative AI, to understand some issues with that, of thinking of things such as potential hallucinations, also thinking about predictive algorithms have a sense of who that, a sense of understanding who the models had been trained on and why they might or might not be appropriate for their use with a particular set of clients. As we think of patients, as we think over time, I think the kinds of things that someone like an advanced practice nurse would need to additionally have an understanding of some common technologies now that we see in advanced practice nursing, the use of ambient documentation, have an understanding of what it is, how it reflects the practice or not. Also thinking about actual skills they need in practice, like their a number of the electronic health records now will have, some built-in tools around, like something like management of your email box, your patient communication, some of those kinds of things. So I think depending on role, people need to know, different kinds of things. But I think like many of the non-AI based electronic tools, I think very much they need to go into this understanding that this is an extension of their practice, and they need to know how to embrace it and take advantage of what it has to offer, but not be overly dependent on it for the things that indeed require their human expertise.
So I want to end on something that you just mentioned, which is understanding who these models were trained on. So your work has centered on reducing health disparities in underserved populations through applications of innovative informatic methods. You had noted AI is pulling from systems, and these are systems that we've created. And as the Algorithmic Justice League notes, those systems and subsequent AI systems really can perpetuate racism, sexism, ableism, and other forms of harmful discrimination, including in healthcare. So I guess I'm wondering, how do we make sure as healthcare providers that the AI systems we're using doesn't perpetuate forms of harmful discrimination because of these new technologies we're now incorporating into all aspects of healthcare?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a concern, and I think about a number of different things, that are going on that can help to mitigate this. One is, I think there's increasing attention to whose voices might be missing in some of the data sets and how that might perpetuate particular biases. A number of different people have proposed different types of labeling systems for AI, including, and it's similar to the idea of a nutrition label, but where you really get the sense of, who was the algorithm trained on, what was some performance, so just so you have some very basic facts that you might understand how the people upon whom the model was trained are similar or different than the patient that you might have in front of you. So I think it's something that we always have to pay attention to. I think there are, when we think about the publishing of models and journal publications, there certainly are reporting standards now that try to tease out some of that. But it always remains a concern, and so I think we need to continue to pay attention to it so that the AI is not perpetuating some of those biases. A number of institutions are thinking, well, now I'm thinking more talking about from the healthcare side. A number of institutions have put in pretty broad-based monitoring, not only thinking about, technically how is the model working and those types of things, but really having more of a community engaged approach that would have like community advisors and that kind of thing to be part of that evaluation process about how the models are working in practice. And I think by having different types of humans in the loop at the different phases of not only the algorithmic of the algorithmic life cycle, including its implementation and practice. I think those are examples of strategies that can help. The other thing I've been thinking about is just evolving initiatives around patients' rights, Bill of Rights related to AI. And so there's some very interesting work from the Light Collective that talks about some of those aspects. And I think it's important for nursing to be aware of and monitoring that, given our attention to patient-centeredness and in what we do, and think about how some of those strategies, and it plays out even in bigger ways than just thinking about the data sets, but also thinking about it, return of value. And so thinking about if patients' data are contributing to generation of predictions or other types of AI tools, what type of value might be returned to them individually or to a group at large from those technologies, not just having a particular company make money based on reuse of their data, patient data, for those purposes. So those are some of the things I think about, but we all want, it to be AI for good, and it's an important tool, but we must be vigilant about the potential misuses.
Yeah, definitely important areas to think about for sure. So you just mentioned the Light Collective, and I mentioned the Algorithmic Justice League. As we close, I'm wondering if there are any other resources you can recommend for nurses to learn more about equitable AI or just AI in general. Do you have any favorite books or podcasts or research articles?
Well, I mean, there's so much coming all the time. So it's actually very difficult to keep up. I know there is an international group that is co-led by Max Topaz, who's here at Columbia, that is focused on nursing and AI. And they've had a great series of papers on AI in nursing and practice and research, and so those kinds of things. So I tend to pay attention to that. I think our various nursing organizations are paying more and more attention to it. Of course, I personally stay up as the editor-in-chief of the Journal of the American Medical Informatics Association by seeing many submissions on this particular area, and then a number of the nursing informatics group have a variety of activities that are in this particular area. But I think importantly, we think about it from the context of our, application domain of nursing. But I think some of the it's very important to think about it from more of an interdisciplinary perspective, because it's the socio-technical system in which AI is developed and deployed requires many different perspectives. But I always, one of the things I always remind the pre-licensure nursing students is just to say, you will be an expert in the domain of nursing, and don't discount that. And you're being able to bring that perspective to the table, even if you're not an expert in the technology, whether it's another type of technology or it's an AI-based technology.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Well, Dr. Bakken, thank you so much for being here with us on the Amplify Nursing Podcast today and sharing your incredible 50-year nursing journey with us. Really appreciate it.
It's been my great pleasure.
Alrighty. Hey, Angela, my friend, how are you?
Hey, Marion, how are you? I'm amazing.
So this is like the kickoff of season 11. I mean, I know we had the episode last week, which was our live from the Summer Innovation Institute, but this is like the first recorded session of the season, and I've missed talking with you. I'm really excited to talk all things AI this season.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I really, really enjoyed your first interview.
Yeah, she's fascinating. So Professor Bakken, who I met at our Penn Nursing AI in Nursing conference earlier this year, and I learned so much from her presentation and from all of the presentations because, I'm an innovation methodologist. I am solution agnostic. So, if AI is the way to solve something great, if it's not, great. So, I'm learning along with everyone else, I think.
Yeah, agreed. And I think that's the space that I'm in. We're all getting to the point now where not just in nursing, but in life, like AI is touching everything. So we really need to learn about it and figure it out and understand, like you said, where does it work? Where does it not work? And how we can integrate it in a productive way in nursing.
Yeah, productive way and a safe and equitable way. And, that's really why I wanted to talk with Dr. Bakken, because one of the things she presented at that conference was around human-centered AI. And, a lot of the work I do is around human-centered design. And I was curious to talk with her more about what human-centered AI means and how we can help to not continue to perpetuate harm, because we know that AI is pulling from biased systems. And if we pull from biased systems, we're going to continue to create technologies that are biased and harm certain groups of people. And so, part of my equity-centered design work is really to help nurses and others to decrease those harms and understand that systems are designed for the outcomes they create. And so if you're creating these systems, again, unintentionally with data that does harm, it's our responsibility to make sure we don't perpetuate that.
Totally agree. And I think that I feel like that's something that most people don't really consider, that when you think about like a machine generated algorithm, let's say, I don't think people think about the fact that somebody had to program that machine in order to do the thing that you wanted to do. And then that machine was then programmed with whatever the programmer decided was going
Yep.
to be the algorithm. I remember a long time ago having a conversation with somebody about this, and they got really insulted when I was like, well, it's the algorithm is just somebody's opinion in math. And she was furious at that idea, as if it could only be objective. And I was like, but no, like somebody had to decide what information are we going to use to put into this algorithm. You know what I mean? And I
Yeah,
think that
totally.
it's something that I feel like many people don't consider. I don't always consider either, where the information is coming from. So this conversation, I think, was a great reminder. And plus I'm super fascinated with complex adaptive systems. And she definitely talks a lot about how integrating AI into all these systems has a consequence, and it's making it human centered and understanding the equity and the bias in it is such an important part of that.
Yeah, for sure. And to even make sure that we're including more humans, more people in the development and in the implementation of these technologies, right? Like just because we have AI doesn't mean now humans can take a step back. In fact, it probably means we need to be taking a step forward again and making sure that what we're creating and how we're including and using these technologies is what is intended, and is intended again in a way that is safe and equitable for all patients and populations.
Amplify Nursing is hosted by Dr. Angela Rosa DiDonato and Marion Leary, and produced by the University of Pennsylvania School of Nursing. Music for the podcast was created by Harper Leary. The podcast is made possible by the Krista and Rich Pinola Fund for Innovation in Nursing.
Until next time, keep pushing over, under, around, and through. We want to thank you for listening to the Amplify Nursing Podcast and remind you to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you enjoy your podcast listening. And if you can do us a solid, please rate and review us as well. It will go a long way in amplifying our episodes.